Well, hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show. It's Tuesday, the 17th of September, 2019, and of course, it's an odd juxtaposition between the two. You like that word, juxtaposition? Between the air mass that we have sitting in the northeast and mid-Atlantic states with dry air getting dragged all the way down the eastern seaboard. And against that, we have a strong Category 2, probably going to become a Category 3 hurricane in Humberto that is off the east coast and heading toward Bermuda, likely to make a close pass to Bermuda, but hopefully it'll pass the core of the hurricane, will go by just to the north, as is being advertised by most models. And then, surprise! So much of a surprise that this morning, usually one of the first things I do in the morning is I look at everything, obviously, that's going on, but I also particularly look at the tropics. And I saw that the Hurricane Center was still talking about the system in the Northwest Gulf, and they had a 20% chance of development. And I thought, oh, they upped it from 10%. But I thought, well, it's close to the coast. And I just didn't even look to see what was going on because my attention was focused more on the hurricane offshore and the system that was east of the leewards. Then here comes the advisory. I walk in after my drive, and one of my colleagues says, well, I look up and I see that we have, I knew there was a tropical depression. They were going to make a tropical depression 10. And suddenly I hear my colleague say, oh, they made the system a tropical storm. And I thought, well, they just made it a tropical depression. He said, no, the one in the Gulf of Mexico. And I was like, what? And sure enough, and this is not the first time that it's happened. Every once in a while, you get these systems that are really, really close to the coast. And having lived along that coast of Texas many years ago, down in Corpus Christi, further south, but that water there in early and mid-September gets very warm. You're talking about water temperatures in the shallow layers that can get up to 90 degrees. And we sometimes see, under certain circumstances, you wind up seeing quick development offshore. And if you look at the satellite signature of Tropical Storm Imelda, it's actually fairly impressive in terms of the signature there. And you see the expanding canopy now as the system the center has moved inland. It was still a tropical storm as of the advisory time at 5 this evening. I did notice during this afternoon, right before they upgraded, that Galveston, which was a good 50 miles away from where the center was, Galveston was sustained at 30, gusting to 36. So it was shortly after that they wound up upgrading it to a tropical storm. So now the depression that is east of the Leeward Islands in the central tropical Atlantic, when that gets upgraded, and I think it will, possibly tonight, that gets the next name on the list, which is Jerry. So suddenly we're at getting close to having the 10th named cyclone of the season. And if you go back in hurricane history, you'll find that there are a lot of seasons that don't quite make it to the number 10. The whole stretch of years from 1970 to the early, I think till about 1985, most years was the total tropical storm numbers were fairly contained to a dozen or less. So we are in and have been in some sort of hurricane upcycle that the Hurricane Center has pointed out in several discussions. Started back in 1995. And there have been several storms. The Hurricane Center mentions Allison as one of those storms that became a tropical storm very close to the coast. And that's important because Allison, while as a tropical storm itself, really wasn't any big deal when it was offshore and coming on land, it was a very big deal when it came to rainfall. That was back in 2001. And many folks talk about the in southeastern Texas in the Houston-Galveston area brought up Allison before Harvey. And Allison was the signature generational storm, or what they called the 500-year flood, only to be eclipsed by another 500-year flood, only it wasn't quite 500 years in between the two, when Hurricane Harvey a couple of years ago went inland in coastal Texas and then just stalled out for 3 days before it finally started to move away. In the east, you could see Humberto in play. The eye kind of faded a bit earlier, but now has come back again and is actually very well defined. It looks like it's even cleared out as you see the sunset go by. And I think this is going to make a Category 3 status. Also, with Harvey in that, with Humberto in that position, you got dry air from Canada is being funneled down. And if you look at up in Maine, those clouds that extend from Maine on eastward to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, that is the upper trough that is swinging southeastward and is responsible for pulling Humberto eastward away from the east coast, and will eventually create an alleyway for it to move out of the way. So we're gonna go back to Humberto shortly. I want to still talk a little bit more about what's going on in South Texas, and just to show you, at least from the standpoint of some watches and warnings, we do have flash flood watches and also tropical storm warnings for a very small area of the Texas coast, Port Bolivar to Sargent, Texas. It's a small area there, but the coastal counties and just inland of the coastal counties, including Houston and Galveston, and over into parts of extreme southwestern Louisiana, excuse me, up to under flash flood watches, and there are going to be 10 to 15 inch rainfall amounts out of this. The WPC 7-day rainfall map is particularly useful here, and as we take a look at that, you see the area that they're indicating in southeastern Texas, down to the Galveston-Houston area, where they have, I believe, if I'm reading these colors correctly, that is probably a 7 to 10 inch area that they have circled. But the Hurricane Center on their forecast has that slightly browner hatched area. Most of that is being indicated as an area where there could be anywhere from 10 to some 15 inch rain amounts. Oftentimes, these slow-moving tropical systems, especially ones if they come in a certain way and maintain part of the circulation over the Gulf of Mexico, you can have these feeders of heavy rain developing and setting themselves up inland. They don't move very much, and you just wind up seeing inch after inch of rain. I think we're going to see some 1 foot plus amounts. And some of that moisture is going to get pulled northward, so you see there's also heavy rains being indicated for several to 6 inches in parts of the middle Mississippi Valley and southern plains, and then going on up into the northern plains with systems that are moving along in the northern jet. You have some 2 inch plus rain amounts showing up there. From much of Virginia down into Alabama, not a drop of rain forecast in the next 7 days. Rainfall in Florida looks also to be relatively minimal, except the extreme southeast. And much of the northeast, except for around Lake Ontario and points north and east into the St. Lawrence Valley, showing amounts ranging from anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch to pockets of 1 1/4 inches to 1.5 inches over the next 7 days. And the same applies for the Great Lakes and on up into the Pacific Northwest. But it's the tropically induced rain in Texas that I think is going to be the big deal in all of this. All right, so let's start looking at these storms one by one. Before we do that, just really fast, showing you SPC's forecast, the Storm Prediction Center for any severe weather. And of course, if you're watching this on the replay, you know that the radars are dated, so you want to go to weather.gov and pull up your local National Weather Service office so that you can get the latest on any watches or warnings. and the latest radars. We don't have any watches or warnings up at the moment, but we do have those two areas of marginal risk in Minnesota and Iowa, and parts of the western Dakotas, northeastern Wyoming, and easternmost Montana, and an area of thunderstorms coming into the Pacific Northwest coastline. Okay, so let's take a look. We're going to start with Imelda, and I'm going to bring up the Houston radar to begin with, which is pretty active here. We can actually see it's one of those situations when you got something coming inland. You can see the circulation. The low-level circulation is inland now. It looks to be south of Houston and west of Galveston. So maybe if I had to just eyeball guess it, maybe south of Houston by about 30 miles or so. And you could see the heavy rain bands that are rotating around it. And also you could see bands of rain in to the northeast of Galveston. And this is one of those feeder bands that I was mentioning before. When you get these slow-moving systems moving northward, you can have this feeder that just kind of extends down into the Gulf of Mexico, and you get these waves of heavy rain that move in to southeast Texas and in southwestern Louisiana. So we're going to see primarily a north-northwest to northward motion from this going forward. And here's what it looks like on the wider view, so you get a better perspective. You actually have bands as far to the west as almost to about Lafayette in Louisiana, and going northwest from there up to about Alexandria. Not the biggest system in the world. It's on the smallish side, but again, rain is the big deal here. Rain, the wind is nothing special, but the rain is the primary focus here with regards to flooding. And on the other side of this, by the way, just to show you where we are here in the Northeast and down in the Mid-Atlantic states, all of this, what you see here down in the Mid-Atlantic states, for the most part, is ground clutter. There really is not much of anything going on. It looks like there might be a few showers here that have bubbled up in parts of North Carolina, but that's it. The Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, just as bone dry as it can get, and then you head out into the other risk zones. You've got some action up in the Arrowhead there of Minnesota, and then moving into western Nebraska and into western South Dakota, where we have that marginal risk of severe weather that is being indicated. Now here's what it looks like on the satellite loop, and I've gotten a really tight zoom here. It really just came to being. In fact, you know what? I'm going to bring up the Gulf shot and take it out, because I'm curious now, because I didn't really look this morning to see, as I said earlier, what we were actually dealing with there. So I'm going to bring up the loop and loop it back to as far as I can, and see and watch this, see what I missed. You know, when you get multiple tropical systems around, especially, you know, when you start getting the ones that are threatening land, it's a lot to handle one of them. But when you got to handle two, all right, it doesn't go back far enough. It only goes back to the first frame on this is from 11 o'clock this morning. So right before they upgraded it to a tropical depression and then a tropical storm. But you can clearly see there was a circulation here as the system moved on inland. This was from the upper low, that cold upper low. Try and remember from a couple of days ago when we were looking at the loops and the structure of the clouds, and that when you see that broad swirl, banded convection with a lot of empty cloud-free conditions in between, clearly, you know, these sprawling upper lows, and how it just basically, the upper low is gone. And then it became warm core. It completely warmed, and you wound up with Tropical Storm Imelda. It was a process that took going back from late last week, so it took every bit of 4 or 5 days to complete. These cold upper lows can eventually transform themselves if they sit over very warm water for a long enough period of time. The structure changes from cold core to warm core. So you got to witness it here, one of those situations where that sort of thing winds up happening. So a little meteorology in play. Now, one last thing here. Let's just take a look at the Hurricane Center's rainfall map for Imelda, because I did mention it before. So this is what they're doing. So you see they have it in and around Galveston and Houston, forecasting at least 10 to 15 inches, with 6 to 10 inches going well up to the north in East Texas, and lesser amounts, but every bit of 2 to maybe 6 inches in parts of southwestern Louisiana. So this is 72-hour rainfall. So indeed, this is going to be a big weather producer. And with respect to their forecast track, and we'll go back and look at this, you're going to find that when we pull it up on the models, it's very, very hard to see. But here's the Hurricane Center. It's just basically a north-northwest course. It's going to be a depression probably on the next advisory, and then becoming post-tropical as it gets far enough inland. So now let's move on to Tropical Depression 10, and I'll bring up the Hurricane Center's forecast for this. And they have it actually becoming a tropical storm possibly at the 11 o'clock advisory tonight, and then strengthening to a hurricane. And conditions are favorable at least for a while. I'm not so sure about what's going to happen, though. Well, there's a number of things I'm not sure of here, including the fact that if we have a well-developed system, I think the chances are that it will pass north of the northernmost Leeward Islands, north of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. However, if it stays weaker and is a bit more shallow in nature, you could wind up with a system that goes further west and south. And that is something that the HWRF model, which is notorious for doing this sort of stuff, so you want to be skeptical, but it keeps it weaker, at least initially, and gets it into the eastern Caribbean, at which point it explodes it into a Category 3 hurricane as it moves south of the Virgin Islands and south of Puerto Rico and along the south shore of the Dominican Republic. I think that's probably a long shot. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I'm going to wait to see what kind of development we have out of this over the next 24 to 36 hours, because we do have some time. The closest pass to the leewards will be Friday afternoon. So right now, the Hurricane Center has their plot is far enough north and west of the islands where the impact wouldn't be a serious one, but the southern edge of the uncertainty of the cone, if you want to refer it to the cone of uncertainty, does cross the northern leewards and crosses the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And admittedly, your luck lately has not been all that good over the last several years. So certainly you're going to want to keep an eye on this. And in fact, when we look at the latest on the satellite floater image, and just want to give you a note of caution, when you look at these floater images, and I'm identifying this as a floater image, they're called that because the geography floats. The idea is to keep the storm near the center of the storm center, near the middle of the picture. So as it moves, the geography actually shifts. So it can be very deceptive in terms of, if you don't realize that, you're thinking you're seeing one type of motion, and in reality, you're seeing something different. Right now, the motion is generally west-northwest. One of the things I'm noticing here, as we go from the visible to the infrared, is there seems to be a marked increase in convection going on this evening. I think that would probably be where the center is, would probably be somewhere on the underneath the easternmost edge of that convection, but we are seeing thunderstorms increase. So that might lend support to this being upgraded to a tropical storm if that trend continues. Not seeing any real evidence of shear. It is a system that is definitely in the process of getting organized, and it is moving on that west-northwest course. And again, it looks like a close shave for the Leeward Islands, and passing far enough north of those islands and Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, where the impacts would not be would be manageable. However, I'm making that as a cautious statement right now. There's certainly enough margin of error here where we could wind up seeing something a little bit further south. So the next 36 hours are going to be very critical in all this. Now, Humberto, as we take a look at our hurricane, and here we go. That eye earlier was cloud-filled, and then it became visible again during late this afternoon, and it looks pretty well defined. The storm has achieved a degree of symmetry that you often see with systems that are about to become major hurricanes. The high clouds reaching the North Carolina Outer Banks. They've pulled away from the South Carolina shorelines that was there yesterday as the storm has moved further to the east. And the next stop here is going to be Bermuda. And a hurricane warning is now up for Bermuda. So the one thing that has happened today, and this was a trend that started yesterday, is there's been a gradual expansion of the gales and the hurricane force winds. This has become a rather large storm, and in fact, I'll just we'll bring up the advisory. The Hurricane Center's website today has been coming and going. So if you try from time to time, it's been a bit difficult. So maximum sustained winds at 90, gusting to 110. That 960 millibar pressure oftentimes translates to a Category 3 hurricane, but the Hurricane Center pointing out, and rightfully so, the expansion of the storm getting bigger. You're getting a bigger wind field, but the strongest winds are a bit less. So they're only carrying about 90 knots. But the hurricane force winds go out roughly 40 to 50 miles in all directions from the center, a little more to the southeast and southwest, and a little less to the northeast and northwest. So the storm's a bit tilted on the wind field to the south. And the 50-knot winds go 80 northeast, 80 southeast, 60 southwest, 80 northwest. So you're getting that symmetry there of the 50-knot winds, 80, 80, 80, and 60. And gales go out 130 miles northeast, 150 southeast, and 120 southwest and northwest. That's considerable to go out that far. So it's about 250 miles across in terms of the gales on average. 250 miles across experiencing gales, and that's a pretty wide target. So certainly the tropical storm warnings that are up for Bermuda are justified. And if you look at the GFS, which makes a pass at Bermuda by about, I would say, a little bit more than 60 nautical miles. And I don't know if you can see it on the map. If you look straight east of where the low is by the, I don't know, maybe half an inch or a bit more, there is, at least on my screen, it's about an inch to the east of that L. There's a little line. It looks like a speck. That's Bermuda, okay? So as it makes its closest pass to Bermuda, which would be Wednesday night into early Thursday morning, and I have the times on Tropical Tidbits on the maps right on the upper left. You'll see it there. It's a little small, but this is at 8 a.m. Wednesday, and at this point, Bermuda's just not in the gales yet. But by afternoon, by 1 in the afternoon, they're on the edge of the 30 knot plus winds. And by tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, at this time tomorrow night, they're inside the 50-knot sustained wind. So that it looks like a 60-mile pass, which would put them, I think, in that 50-knot plus sustained core, but just missing, if barely, getting into where the hurricane force winds are. That should pass just far enough northeast to spare them the core of the hurricane. But it's a very, very close call here. You're talking about 60 nautical miles, which is not a lot. And then it begins to pull away as we move into Thursday morning. And from here, the idea is there's a bit of a jog to the north and even to the northwest, okay? As it makes a swing, it looks like it's getting ready to go right toward Cape Cod, but that's as far as it goes, because right after that, it's back to the northeast and east. It looks like it passes just south of Nova Scotia, though some fringe gales, well, they don't quite make the coast, but it gets a little breezy there for Friday along the South Shore coast, but it's well offshore on the GFS, and on most of the other models, we're seeing a pass that goes pretty far out to the northeast. In the meantime, I just want you to look, just to go back to Imelda for a second, follow that green speck, okay? That green speck in the Gulf of Mexico going back to Sunday. That's a little belt of gusty winds. That is near the Texas coast yesterday afternoon, and you could see the low. You could barely see the closed isobar here, but right here at 1 o'clock this afternoon, you've got that very, very small area of gales that forms right near what would be the circulation center. I mean, this really was one of those sort of freaky little systems that gets a name out of the way, and that's just about it. The NAM might show it a bit better. I didn't even look at it late this afternoon, but it's got the radar reflection of it coming inland, and you can also see how it handles Humberto as it makes a similar pass to the GFS about 60 nautical miles to the northwest of Bermuda, and then moving on to the northeast. And by the way, while this is all happening, of course, we don't want to forget the fact that we've got here, and I'm going to use a nice blue color to match the colors of the sky today. It's not often in my neck of the woods that you wind up with wall-to-wall sunshine from start to finish without a cloud in the sky, but that's what it looked like today. But you've got a northeast flow here from this high that's up in northern New Hampshire and Maine, and the gradient is actually, I wouldn't say it's tight, but it isn't loose, running down into the Carolinas. Rip tides are going to be a continued problem here along the Carolina coast, and then as we move into Thursday night, Friday, expect rough surf to develop from further north, as the storm is going to be north of 35 degrees north, and this is going to create some rough surf conditions. You've got this really long fetch of northeast winds coming around the system, around the hurricane, and going all the way back down into the mid-Atlantic coast. Thankfully, we had the full moon last week, the harvest moon on Friday, so we're actually going into the first quarter moon, so the tide cycles are coming down. So I think if there's going to be some coastal flooding problems, they would be on the order of minor to the occasional pocket of moderate in the normally susceptible areas. I'm not expecting any unusual kind of coastal flooding with this. The other thing is that, of course, the weather in general is going to be quite nice for the rest of the week, because while all this is going on, you have all this dry air. I mean, it's just loaded with dry air here in the eastern part of the United States. Look at these dew points. By the way, I didn't forget the tropics in the long term. I'm going to go back to that in a moment, but I just want to, since we're looking at the current weather, but just take a look at these dew points here as they drop all the way down into Georgia. You're looking at dew points down in the 40s, and in the Northeast, you got dew points by Thursday morning down in the 30s, and we're talking low 30s in some places. So real humidity relief makes it all the way down into almost right to the Florida panhandle there, backing out through Alabama by the time we get to Friday. I mean, this is just really delightful Canadian air. You used to say, one of my old colleagues and mentor, a good friend, Alan Casper, would always say when he was on the air years ago, how this was the air mass where you could smell the Canadian pines. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you could, especially if you're coming out of a long period, which we didn't do, where you're dealing with heat and humidity, and you're just happy to, the relief. But you definitely can smell the freshness in the air. It's just so darn nice out. And we're going to be like this for the rest of the week and into the weekend. The upper air driving all of this is so favorable for dry air in the east. Backing it up, getting there, I want to show you what's happening here. So we're at 8 o'clock tonight, which we're 30 minutes away from. And to the northeast, east of Nova Scotia out to Newfoundland, we have this large upper low and trough. And what's happening is this trough is extending back southwestward. And there's another arm that is coming around in this trough that is swinging down from Canada. And that is important. It's the driver to turn. This is going northeast, and then it's going to turn north, a little more northward in response to this trough, swinging southeastward and probably cutting off a little bit. So you're going to see a trough extend southwestward over time. But the bottom line is it was this upper air trough here from eastern Canada extending southwestward. You've got northerly winds here. I mean, north-northwest winds in the upper atmosphere that have just picked this system up and kicked it away. And here in the north through New England and down into the northern mid-Atlantic states, you've got just dry Canadian air coming down. And you have to wait for this trough to pull out in order to get warmer and let's call it quote-unquote more humid air. That may come as we get into the weekend. The humidity is going to come up somewhat. But if you look here by tomorrow afternoon, there's an east-west trough that's moving on through. So if you're in my neck of the woods along the coast tomorrow, I think you might see some patchy clouds intermixed with sun. But that's about it. Everybody else should be partly to mostly sunny. That's, I think, my biggest forecast headache over the next 4 or 5 days. And there you can see Humberto, as it passes by Bermuda, kind of gets wrapped up in that trough as it cuts off. The main trough's going to pull away, and then this is going to get kicked out to the northeast, and we can say goodbye. And as we move into the weekend, we're going to see a ridge push into the eastern part of the United States in the upper atmosphere. I have to switch to the GFS at this point. And that is going to bring warmer air. You're going to see temperatures start to rebound a bit on Friday. The next 2 days, it's mostly upper 60s and low 70s by day, and nighttime lows in the 50s with a lot of 40s and cool spots. And then as we move into the weekend, Friday and the weekend, we're going to start to warm up, but it stays pretty dry. And here comes another shortwave trough with another cold front, maybe late in the day on Monday. So that plays out. You know, this is what's playing out here when you've got all these tropical systems running around. All right, so now let's get back to the tropics. I know it's a little uneven here, but I'm trying to at least, carry it from a standpoint of time over what what we might be dealing with. Now, let me just caution everyone here at this point, because one of the impressions I got in terms of the overall pattern going forward in the Atlantic and across the eastern part of the United States, and combine that with the very active tropical convergence zone with these tropical waves coming off of Africa on a regular basis, that it is trying to figure out what's going to happen is pretty complex. And I think we're going to have a rather difficult puzzle to go through over the coming days, because we've got all of these waves coming out, and we're seeing models play up some waves over others, and it's hard to tell which ones they're doing a good job with and which ones they may be ignoring or just not doing a good job with. For example, here you clearly and plainly can see we have the players. We have Humberto here. Of course, here's Imelda, and we're looking at the map for 8 o'clock tonight. Here's Tropical Depression 10, and it looks like there's some another wave that's getting ready to come off the African coast and moving on to the west. Okay, so going forward, you're looking at the models. Now, there goes Humberto. You've got a high here, a surface high that's building back westward. So your depression is riding underneath that ridge. So how strong that ridge is going to determine how much latitude is this going to gain. And if you look at the GFS, it really doesn't do very much with this. Remember, the Hurricane Center is strengthening this to a hurricane, and the GFS is actually showing quite a bit of shear extending down from Humberto. There's a trough that kind of extends down from there, and that's creating some rather hostile winds. If you look at the at the GFS at least, I can't see what the European's upper air profile is, but the GFS is not really doing very much with this and keeping it a weak system as it approaches the Bahamas, and then it moves up toward Bermuda as a tropical depression or a tropical storm and out. I don't know that that's right. The GFS may have this wrong. One of the important things to look for in the outcome of this is going to be the outcome of Humberto. If the models are kind of doing this thing where they gets briefly hung up for a day or so off the New England coast before it gets kicked out to the east-northeast. But if this winds up moving out a little faster to the northeast, you could see the high build back further west. And if there's less of a trough extending southward, there would be a much more favorable environment for a system to hold together. So those questions are there. Also, as we go down the road, you can see that there's waves out here running across. And by the way, the European, at this stage, actually has a hurricane or almost a hurricane in this part of the tropical Atlantic from this follow-up tropical wave that is going by. By the way, I also want to mention, I want to make a point to mention this for those of you that are watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. It would seem like, again, it looks like it's coming right for you, and then it shoots out to the east, and it misses Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. I think that's the most likely outcome, and this is with a scenario where it gets delayed. The reason why you're probably okay this time around, as opposed to the last time when it was coming up at you, where Dorian was coming at you up at you from the south-southwest, is that if you look up in Canada, you've got protection here in the form of a shortwave trough and another trough behind that's way up to the north in northwestern parts of Hudson Bay. And that is going to move eastward, and it will be responsible for kicking Humberto out to the northeast. You can see how this trough deepens east of Labrador. That's your kicker for this, and it drives it onto the northeast. Those of you watching from Ireland and England and Scotland, this particular run of the model has a fairly vigorous storm heading your way in about 7 days. Let's see if the models hold this together, if that's the plan. I don't know that. I haven't really been able to spend a lot of time analyzing that part of the equation, but certainly check back over the next couple of days to see if this is the way we're going to be going with this, that you could wind up with a post-tropical wind and rainstorm that will be moving into England, Ireland, and Scotland in about a week or so. So just want to point that out to my viewers and friends who are watching from that particular part of the world. The whole upper air, by the way, is across the Atlantic is going to be impacted by the ultimate track of Humberto. How far south is it going to track up in the northern latitudes? Does it get lifted up closer to the southern point of Greenland, or does it take the southern route just north of the Azores? Because the southern route would leave a flatter upper high out in the Atlantic for any system to travel underneath. Anything that's down here is going to want to go to the west. It's going to rely on the strength of the ridge to the north of it, and it's going to be important to see the viability of any kind of upper high that builds out in the Atlantic in the long term. And by the way, as we get into the longer term, you get a lot of model disagreements, and I'll show you here on the European. We have the GFS up here right now. So the GFS brings another shortwave trough through the northeast Monday night into Tuesday. So if this is correct, if we have any kind of tropical system in this position, it's going to recurve up and out. Okay, that's a big if. You have to have a system there to begin with. There's another shortwave that's right behind it, right up here. And that kind of drives in and really plunges a deep trough along the east coast. Look at these, the westerlies in the upper atmosphere go down into the Florida Straits. That is a really far south push of those northwest winds in the upper atmosphere. So you've got a trough like this along the East Coast. Ain't no way anything's coming up the eastern seaboard with this type of upper air. However, the European, in all its wisdom, has a slightly different scenario. So I'm just going to outline so you can look by comparison when I switch the maps. So here's the jet on the GFS. Okay, this is for next Thursday. So we're looking at 9 days from now. So you've got this upper low, and that's a cold upper low that is into over the St. Lawrence Valley near northernmost New York State. Okay, so that's what the GFS looks like. Now, let me just finish this off so you can see there's an upper high over here. I'm trying to be as neat as I can. So you've got this upper high. So there's the GFS. Now, oops. Well, that was smart. Sorry about that. All right, let me try that again. Upper low. Here's your jet. We'll draw your trough. Here's your upper high. Okay. So you've got this trough, and you remember you've got your westerlies going all the way down into the Florida Keys and across the Bahamas. So that is the GFS. Now let's I'm going to take this off for a moment because it's not going to let me do it otherwise. Hang on one second. Okay, that will do it. All right, so now I'm going to switch to the European. And I'm going to put the contours back on. Little by little, I'm learning this. Okay, so now I have overlaid the GFS upper air for the same time frame, 8 or 9 days from now, as the European. Needless to say, it's different, okay? The European doesn't race a trough. The first short wave is there that comes through early next week. That is now offshore Newfoundland and well out into the Atlantic. But where the GFS has an upper low and a trough going all the way down into the Florida Straits, the European has an upper high. Okay? It's totally opposite. Completely opposite. And leads to a whole different scenario here. You've got a closed upper high, which I'm drawing in blue on the European. And the winds along... this is just hilarious. So your winds from the Great Lakes down to West Virginia are from the northwest on the GFS. They're from the southwest on the European. Okay? It's a 180-degree flip. And it's different back through the plains. The GFS with its northwest flow, the European with its west-southwest flow. So obviously the models are having big differences in the long term with regarding the timing of short waves, the timing of troughs as they move across. And that's going to be really important because if you wind up with a tropical system and the European does handle them differently, you have a whole different set of outcomes here. Now, here's the European, for example. So here's our system right here. This is, hang on, I want to get, and I'm just doubling back to make sure you guys have a good view of the maps. So here is, whoops, erase. Okay, so Tropical Depression 10, Humberto, Imelda, okay, and that's what we have for tomorrow morning. Now I'm going to move it along, and I'm going to jump right to Sunday. So the European takes the Depression 10, west-northwest. Now the European is faster with getting Humberto out of the way and takes it more north-northeast. It's got a weakening low that passes just southeast of Newfoundland, but it does make it post-tropical and weaken it because of this is a different setup than what we had with Dorian. it's not getting as energized with the upper trough like Dorian did. It's going to get that energizing early in the game, and then it's going to mature and weaken in its post-tropical state. So it goes more north-northeast. As a result, you have less of a trough here in the Atlantic. You have a surface high here. There's probably there's corresponding upper ridge that controls that. So it has a weaker system moving north of the Leewards and the Virgin Islands and keeps it weak as it goes east of the Bahamas. But now this model and a couple of the others trying to show something here in the southeastern Caribbean. Here's another system that comes off the African coast, and we're looking now at day 5 and 6, which the European really keys on as it moves west-northwest, and it's got the system that comes out of the Caribbean. Or is it the system that comes out of the Caribbean? Because if you look at the lead tropical depression 10, it goes east of the Bahamas, gets to about Bermuda, and then suddenly you got this and you got this. So I don't know. There's too much here. There's too much going on. I don't mean to make it sound. I don't mean to add confusion to it. There's too much noise on these models beyond day 4 and 5 to really take them too seriously with all these tropical systems running around. So I think what we really need to do is just sit back and wait to see what comes of all this as far as the longer term is concerned. I would just say this in general. Rule nothing out in either direction. I know that might not exactly be the most profound thing to say. It's just that given the situation that we have with the way the state of the upper air, the state of the models being so different when you get into the longer term, that it's probably wise to keep a number of possibilities open. And by the way, one of those possibilities could be that this could all be much ado about nothing, that all these systems wind up being weak systems and non-events for most areas. That certainly is as much on the table as saying, or they could develop, but they could all wind up being mostly fish storms rather than having big impacts on land, or any combination where maybe one of them, because of one thing or another with respect to the upper air, becomes problematic with regards to a threat for hitting land someplace. This is a good play. This is a good time to just kind of be in that watch, wait, and see mode. And first things first, let's see this thing get upgraded to a tropical depression or a tropical storm, and then we can carry it from there. And then let's see how the models resolve their big differences with regards to where the troughs are and where the ridges are in the longer term. And first and foremost, let's resolve Humberto in terms of what it's going to do as it moves to the north and eventually out to the northeast. Does it get out right away? Does it linger? Does it track just north of the Azores and leaves a big trough in the Atlantic and all these openings for systems to just basically turn up and out, or contribute to even hostile environments as far as development is concerned? Or is it going to take a track further north where the upper high gains control and you wind up with something that could be potentially more threatening to somebody down the road? So that is our dilemma, which I don't think we're going to have resolved tomorrow, or maybe even the next day, but maybe we'll get some clues to see where this is going. So I am now on the chat board with all of you. Jason Schaefer, who I worked with on Saturday over at WPIX TV. Nice to see you on board tonight. What was the last bad former hurricane that went into Ireland? That was Ophelia, okay, in 2016. I believe it was 2016. That was after no, it couldn't be, because you had Maria. So the O storm was Maria. Yeah, so it was 2016. Take a look at that. I'm thinking that wait a minute, 2016 or 2017. You know what? This is easy enough to do. Hold on. It was Ophelia. Hurricane Ophelia, 2017. That was the last. I think that was the last one and that got to a Category 3 hurricane in the eastern Atlantic, as I recall. That was as far east as they had ever seen a Category 3 hurricane, and it did have some impact. Go back and look at some of my YouTube videos on it, because I covered it extensively and had a lot of folks watching from Ireland and England, which was a big thrill to me. Daniel Van Letten, enjoying the beautiful weather this week, as am I. Eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England in the jackpot zone right now. But everybody in the East is going to participate in one form or another. Torter Drash, honestly, is great. Mike, the too tough to call style he has. Oh, thank you. I try. Thanks. I appreciate it. Look, there are no apps. I get such a kick out of. There was somebody, and I don't even remember who it was. But somebody was, because Joe Rea was playing it yesterday, and I sit opposite him, so I can't see what's on his screen, but I certainly can hear. And he was playing someone with this sort of long-range winter forecast that this person was doing, and I just get such a kick out of people that put out stuff, and they have all these absolutes on there for stuff that's 3, 4, 5 months down the road, and here we are trying to decipher this dilemma. One of the reasons why I think that weather sometimes weather people get a big knock, and this is not necessarily their fault. Up until, when I first started out in the business, there was a philosophy that you should never, I have always felt that it was perfectly reasonable and honest, that the audience expects you to be an honest person. And if you are not sure about something, or if there is some variability, it needs to be explained. There are a lot of things that are just not absolute, and sometimes even inside of 24 hours, you're sweating stuff out. And there were a lot of bosses who would tell you not to do that. Thankfully, I just kind of always went my own way when it came to, being straightforward and honest. When weather is, when I'm not sure, I'm not sure. I'm not going to pretend like I am. And right now, like I said, and as I showed you, there's too much going on to come to any sort of conclusion as what the longer term is going to bring. Kareem Sanchez, some of the worst hurricanes have happened toward the end of the season. Well, last year, Michael was Category 5 in the first 10 days of October. Hurricane Sandy for the Mid-Atlantic, for the northern Mid-Atlantic states, and that was in late October. It does, the chances for major hurricanes after the middle of October, it does go down. It doesn't go to zero, but it does go down statistically. But there have been, I believe that Wilma was a late season hurricane. It certainly wasn't a September storm. I think that came later on, going into late October, early November, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong, someone correct me, please. Weatherman 746. There are two scenarios for TD10. It can go out to sea, or the Bermuda hike and push it to the East Coast. Or it could not develop at all. There's three scenarios. Or it could be, it could stay weak and just kind of move westerly in the low-level flow and miss the trough. So now I've given you two more, so now there's four. So there's never just two scenarios. Just to point that out. There's a few other possibilities here. If it becomes... I will say this, if it does develop as strongly as the Hurricane Center has, I think the chances of it being an out-to-sea type of storm increase, because it's going to respond to the steering flow in the higher levels of the atmosphere, and there's going to be more support for something to turn rather than go straight to the west. So that is a definite possibility. My buddy Chuck Cardillo, I hope you had a very good day today up in the Catskills, where you must have had so much sun that you didn't know what to do with it. So I hope it was a good day, and you got another good day coming up tomorrow. Spinner Chick, any storm coming to Miami? No. There's nothing imminent to Florida at the moment. Come back in a couple of days. I might say something different, but right now, based on what I'm seeing in the longer term, it appears that Florida is not at risk. But again, I would caution because there's just too much out there. Ryan Ford, it looks like, based on the upper air maps that I showed earlier, that Humberto had an effect on changing the pattern to a drier one along the East Coast. That is correct. Humberto, being where it is in its position, the trough that is moving off the New England coast, remember, all these gears work in tandem with the others. So the shortwave trough that moved off the New England coast pulls the hurricane to the east. Dry air and northerly winds aloft are forced down the eastern seaboard, and that dry air winds up going all the way down eventually into the Carolinas and Georgia. So yes, the answer to your question is absolutely yes. Gerard Stapleton in St. Martin, I would keep an eye on TD10. If things go according to plan, it goes north of you, and you don't really see too much of it. But the next 48 hours in terms of the track and the strength, I think are going to be key with regards to where that winds up for you. And Johnny Quest, by the way, I just wanted to mention, because you had asked me back days ago about this cold upper low in the Gulf of Mexico possibly developing, and also, and it did. And it's another comparison. If you look at Dorian and you look at Humberto, things in weather, they don't match exactly, but as I said many times, history doesn't repeat, but it does often rhyme. And while the tracks are not exact, you can take Humberto's track and just shift it a little further, just shift it east of where Dorian was by 100 or so, 150 miles. Actually, their tracks are fairly similar. And in terms of the upper air, you had a tropical storm that was induced by a cold upper low that moved across the Gulf of Mexico, warmed up, became warm core. You had a warm core surface low develop, and you had Tropical Storm Ferdinand that went into northeastern Mexico. This time around, it was further to the north, and it wound up going up into southeast Texas. So there is a certain, that part of it certainly matched up very, very well in terms of the outcome of what happened with these two minimal tropical storms that wound up in the Gulf of Mexico. Weather's weather can be tricky, and it could be frustrating, but it also could be quite fascinating. Trevor McKelvey, the HWRF, which is what the Hurricane Center mentioned in their discussion, does take it much further south than the other models, but I would just caution you. The HWRF does a lot of strange things, including makes Category 3 and 4 hurricanes out of nothing. All right, so just be careful with using the HWRF. It happened to actually get Dorian right in terms of the strength, but I think you could make a case for the broken clocks are right twice a day type argument because of how fact that model just does crazy things. Joe Gaffney, thanks very much for the kind words. I've always been, I just try to give an honest answer. I give you my never to be humble opinion. And remember, folks, I'm looking at weather. I'm using my experience and giving you my opinion. When it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes, especially when we're talking about making decisions that are critical to your life, your property, you want to go to the correct sources, and you want to go to the National Hurricane Center and for your information, your local National Weather Service office and your local government officials. I can't stress that enough. I say that every single time we have hurricane warnings up. So please just always remember that. I have, my ideas of what might happen, but they are just that. And you should always go to your local National Weather Service office or the National Hurricane Center and base whatever decisions you make on what they have. Trevor McKelvey, let's look at the recon. I have some time tonight, so I'm not in any rush. So Let's see if there's a plane out there, and we do have the 8 o'clock advisories, so we can go through that. So give me 1 second here. And tropicaltidbits.com is a great go-to source. So we do have a new reconnaissance aircraft in there at the moment. And if you give me 1 second, I will bring the window up. And you can see it. It's just, whoops. Okay, that was an old show. Here we go. So we just made the first pass in. Now, the winds coming in from the northwest, if you notice, there are some white wind barbs here. They're hard to see, but those are the white wind barbs that correspond on the scale, which is right there, of between 96 and 113 knots. So we may indeed have a major here. So 100 knots is 115 miles an hour. I don't know what the specific measurement is. We can check out we'll go to the Hurricane Center's website, and if we go to data and tools, and you hit on aircraft reconnaissance, and go to vortex data message. All right, I have to review, I used to know this by heart. So when you read this, each one of these, some of these I remember and some of them I don't. So the first two is the position. Well, you have the date and time, and then the position. So it's at 31.2 north, 0.19 degrees, so 0.2 north. I'm rounding off. 71.7 west. They measured at the level of the 700 millibar level is 2,669 meters above the surface. Okay. The lowest pressure, 951 millibars. So that's a 10 millibar drop since the last recon was there. I believe it was late this afternoon. So Humberto is every bit a Category 3 hurricane based on the pressure. And when we look at the winds, well, F is telling you it's a closed eye wall. I forgot what G means. H is the maximum wind that they found at near the eye, I believe, at 98 knots. And they actually give you the position. I'm not exactly sure. The J is 038 degrees, 106 knots. So you just kind of scan down here. The numbers that I got to review what all of these mean. When I was 20 years old, I knew every single one of these things, and now I don't. And I think if you look, somebody has to probably have something where it automatically decodes all this in terms of what each of these letters stand for. But when you run down to the bottom, you see on the comments, max flight level wind 111 knots. So if you want to correct the maximum flight level wind by about 10%, you come up with 100 knots. So this is going to be upgraded to a major hurricane. Let's see what they did on their advisory. All right, guessing here. All right, so Imelda's a depression now. There it is. Humberto becomes a major hurricane. On the public advisory, they're carrying maximum sustained winds of 115 miles an hour, moving east-northeast at 12 miles an hour, or 075 degrees, 951 millibars, 28.08 inches, 31.2 north, 71.6 west, or about 405 miles west-southwest of Bermuda and closing in. Nothing new on the depression. I wouldn't have expected it unless there was an obvious sign on the satellite loop that the depression had strengthened to a tropical storm. They're going to leave it alone until 11 o'clock. They got their hands full dealing with all the new data coming in with Hurricane Humberto. So we have another major hurricane. This is number 2 of of our hurricane season. And remember, the hurricane season's forecast, the hurricane's forecast from the Hurricane Center is anywhere from on their updated, they double down and raise their numbers. I think they said from 12 to 17. So if Jerry gets named tonight, they're going to have 10, and we still have plenty of time, and the models all seem to indicate that it's going to stay rather active through the end of the month and into the very beginning of the month of October. Just running back on the chat, I try to get to all the as many of you as I can. I feel bad a lot of the times because I know I skip out. And when I end the live streams and I don't get to everybody. So, if you have a pressing question, first of all, if you're a part of my Patreon platform, weather platform, just put your question over there and I will get to it right ASAP. Otherwise, put your question in the comments section of the videos and I'll be more than happy to try and answer it for you. Jacob wants to know, can I explain in detail the difference between a warm core and a cold core system? Okay, so your wintertime storms, those are all cold core storms. And when you look at those wintertime storms, you're going to see that those storms are stronger as you go higher up into the atmosphere and weaker as you go to the lower part of the atmosphere. So when you look at it on a map, for example, and this time of year it's a little hard to find examples of them, but there are some. So give me a moment here. I'm going to bring up. So a cold core system is another way of saying a storm that is extratropical or non-tropical in nature. It's a storm that originates you see in the mid-latitudes and in the upper latitudes. And as I said, they are stronger as you go higher up into the atmosphere. So when you take a look at, I'm going to go up to the 18,000 foot level. So right here, for example, you have a very, very strong feature in the upper levels of the atmosphere east of Newfoundland. When you look at the surface feature here, you don't really see very much, okay? So this is one example. You do have a surface low that's south of Greenland that's part of this trough, but it's a much stronger system as you go up, and it's colder as you go up. Now, in the warm core system, when you look at the upper air, so take a look at where Humberto is on this map. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Here we go. My bad. So here's Humberto. Let me show you again. So you go to the upper air. The other day I did it for the whole show, and I'm not going to do. I try not to make that mistake. So here it is. So this is a very strong cold core feature in the upper atmosphere over Newfoundland. And in fact, you have a very wrapped up, large cold core storm in the North Atlantic going forward as you head toward the end of the week and going into the weekend. When we pull up the surface feature, you can see the surface storm here that's underneath that big cold core storm. It's sprawling. It covers a lot of geography. The winds in it are, the gales are spread out over a very large area. You don't have that really tight core of winds. Now, if you look at Humberto right now in its purely tropical state, and this might not be the best of examples here because of what's going on to the north, but at least here at the moment, the upper feature, the further up you go into the atmosphere, the shallower the system is. It's most intense near the bottom of the atmosphere. And when you take temperature measurements, those temperatures actually are very warm as you go up in height. Whereas if you go into these cold core non-tropical system, you're going to see temperatures falling with height. So they're totally different in terms of structure and in terms of how they develop and what transpires in their life cycles. Both systems have life cycles where they start as seedlings. They grow into mature storms, and eventually they reach their peak intensity, and then from there they wind up decaying. So I hope that clarifies it. If you want a bit more on it, if you're something you're not understanding, again, just leave something in the comments section, and I'll see if I can follow up on it if I've got some time. Okay, so I'm just going to go back for another minute or two Hi, Chris Alley, if I didn't say hi before. Chuck Cardillo about upwelling. The only thing I would tell you about upwelling is that it can get corrected fairly quickly. It impacts storms that come very close together within a week of each other. But if it's something that, unless it's something that sits over a certain area for a very long period of time, upwelling impacts tend to disappear within a week to maybe 10 days at most. Look at Humberto. Humberto's track is to the east of where Dorian's track is. Even though some of that water was upwelled, obviously enough time passed in between where the water's warm enough now to still support a Category 3 hurricane. Even though we're talking about a storm that's about, a good 400, 500 miles to the east of where Dorian was at this point. But that water was upwelled to some degree. And you're right, Kareem Sanchez. The Bahamas don't need another system headed their way. Okay. So I think I got everybody. I went all the way back to as far back as the chat is letting me go. It's not letting me go all the way to the beginning. William Heinsinger, I hope I pronounced that right. Welcome aboard. Texas needs rain, especially in the central area. Yeah, it's been pretty dry. You've been in a ridge position for quite a while. Hopefully that breaks down soon. And it might, temporarily anyway, with the trough coming into the west, but I'm not so sure how much you're going to be able to get out of it. David Aruda, is there a good chance that we make it to the end name by the season's end? Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're going to be a J tonight, maybe. If not tonight, certainly by tomorrow. So KLMN, you only need 4 more. Plenty of time for that. Yes. What's my thoughts on the Euro showing a very amplified Madden-Julian oscillation signal for the Western Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico? Ask E. Dawson. I have not. This is the first I'm hearing about it. Okay. Also, I'm not a big follower of the Madden-Julian oscillation. I know of it. I know. I kind of understand the concept of it, but I don't follow it as intently as others do. The long-range boys like to look at that MJO. I pay a little bit more attention to it during the wintertime. But if you're telling me that it's giving an amp signal, I'll look around and see if any of the guys and gals that I know that follow the MJO religiously have something to say about it. I really don't have an opinion on it because, to be honest, as I said, I don't really pay much attention to it. Meteorologist Tyler Karen. Do I think any of the hurricanes impacting Pennsylvania? Well, you're going to have to take, obviously it would have to be something that comes up east of the Appalachians as an inland system, something that maybe goes into the eastern Gulf and the Florida Panhandle and rides up the mountains, or something that comes in on the southeast coast and goes inland and rides up east of the mountains. Obviously, I don't see anything right now. There's no, models were hinting at troughing coming into the east in a dynamic way back late last week, but they're not really showing that now. They've gone more to the idea of the trough, being in the east, but being off the east coast rather than inland of the east coast, and that's the biggest difference in the world, being off the east coast versus being inland of the east coast. Ryan Ford, I don't have any library appearances scheduled in New Jersey. I do have one actually scheduled on Long Island in early February in Holbrook at the Sachem Library, and that'll be I think it's February 4th or 5th. I have to go back and double check the date, so I'll talk more about it as we get closer. Johnny Quest, do tropical cyclones have hail in them? Well, they certainly can produce severe thunderstorms that have produced tornadoes. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say of a thunderstorm being produced inside a tropical system that has produced hail. That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that. maybe the severe weather folks could touch on that more, but I don't know what the correct answer to that. It's a very good question. It's something I never, in all the years that I've been doing this, no one's ever thought to ask me that. That's a great question. I'm going to run that by Joe Rayo and see what he says. I'm going to probably tend to say no. I'm just sort of like trying to logically run it through my mind because you have such a warm core going all the way up, and hail usually likes to form in those thunderstorms where you have a really cold upper atmosphere, relatively speaking. So I'm gonna guess no, that you probably can't, but let me double check. Okay, you know what? It's almost 8:20, so I've been at it for an hour and 20 minutes. I think I could say goodnight because I got to get ready to do some TV stuff here. So thanks, everybody, for being here. By the way, for those of you who want more, Weather Geeks cannot get enough, okay? But I have a weather platform on Patreon that I do a lot of extra stuff, including extra videos and extra other weather posts, and you can message me anytime. It starts at just $2 a month. There are multiple tiers for those of you who require maybe more one-on-one attention, or you're just feeling more generous, whichever works. It's $2 a month, and it actually goes a long way to support all the things I'm doing, including my free weather app, which you can download on Google Play or on the App Store. Just search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, and you can use it anywhere because it gives your local forecast for your location. And it has zoom radars, which you can get the radar. You can move it and zoom it or go as wide as you want anywhere across the United States. So again, that's on Google Play or on the App Store. Just search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee or just plain old Joe Chaffee, Cioffi. Tomorrow, weather in 5 tomorrow morning. We'll update all this tropical stuff that's going on, plus the general weather outlook from Northeast Virginia to Southern New England, and touch on any other highlights that are going on elsewhere. Regular website posts throughout the day, and we'll be back tomorrow night with our regular live stream. I put a link up to Patreon. Also, I'll put a link up, so if you want to download the app, it'll take you to the links to the App Store and Google Play. So just give me 1 second here. And here we go. So you've got the Patreon link up there. Now here comes now I'm going to put the link to the free app. And there you go. Scott Briller, you're awfully generous. Thank you so much. You do that. You hit Super Chat so many times. I really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. So here's the link to the free app, and you can download it and tell all your weather friends. Share it around. I really do appreciate all of it. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow night on our regular live stream at probably 7 o'clock Eastern Time.